fifth great Barcelona side, or ultimately a cheap imitation of Pep's tiki-taka project? Just how good are Xavi's Barcelona? Well, I guess the first place to look at when you're analysing a Barcelona team is how it approaches possession. In terms of structure in possession, Xavi's side use a 2-3-5 structure when the ball is in their own defensive third. As the ball progresses up the pitch, this eventually becomes a 2-4-4 or a 3-3-4. In their own third, the centre-back split, and the sixth that operates in front of them is a single pivot and either holds his position in the midfield or drops in to form a back three. What makes Barcelona stand out is their history with a single pivot. No other club has such a rich history associated with this particular tactical profile, to the extent that they're resorting to using a journeyman single pivot specialist such as Romeu just so that they can persist in using it. And the pivot is intended to look like. During this early phase of the build-up, Balde and Cancelo also drop deep, usually taking up orthodox fullback positions to begin with, providing orthodox passing options out wide for the goalkeeper and centre-backs to use. Now, it's worth noting that they're not used as narrowly as a Paro or Udogi at Spurs. At times, the 6 and the 2 fullbacks won't even be needed, as you'll see the likes of Koundé or Christensen drive with the ball, bypassing the press themselves and finding options stationed higher up in the opponent's half. Koundé in particular, with his ability to eat up ground, is effective in this regard. Now, once the ball is out of the defensive third, Cancelo begins to invert with the right winger, usually Yamal, stationed out on the flank, providing the sole source of width. And on the other flank, you've got Balde waiting for the run of Felix inside, which is the trigger to then push forward and become the team's de facto left winger. Now, depending on Felix's positioning and how far the 6 wishes to be away from the centre-backs, Barca will have 4 to 5 players in the midfield at any given time. So it's no surprise that statistically, they accumulate the most touches in the midfield third than any other team in La Liga. Now, once Felix has come inside, that front three consists of Balde, who's the reference point down the left, Lewandowski or Torres through the middle, and Yamal down the right. Now, it's worth noting that Felix can at times make this a 4 when he makes runs into the box too. Now, we're going to look at build-up from the back. Is it short? Is it long? And do they play out from the goalkeeper? Well, as you'd expect, a Xavi team, in terms of its build-up, is courageous, it's audacious, they look to play out under intense pressure, and the key to it all is Ter Stegen, arguably the leading ball-playing keeper in the world, alongside Ederson. He is more likely to go long than Ederson, but it's not hoofball, but rather diags out wide and chips into midfield. In terms of Barcelona's pass tempo, how many passes they make per minute, and their press resistance, well, unsurprisingly, Barcelona are one of the top teams in La Liga in terms of pass tempo and press resistance. However, Real Madrid surpassed them in either respect. In terms of pass tempo, Real Madrid have always historically moved the ball around quicker than Barca, and that makes sense. They're generally associated with a more direct style. Press resistance, however, has always been Barcelona's forte, and the departure of Busquets and the injuries to Pedri and De Jong have definitely had an impact on Barcelona's ability to beat the press this season. We've seen in recent games that Xavi has been caught on the half turn, Fermin Lopez can be quite raw, and Romeu is definitely a step down from Busquets. So you can kind of see why, compared to Real Madrid's glittering array of midfield stars, Xavi might be struggling to surpass the Madristas in this regard, and it's difficult to compare him to Pep, who obviously had him, Iniesta and Busquets in their prime all together in the same midfield. However, I would expect Barcelona to improve in the press resistance regard once the injured players return from injury, and the gaping hole at 6 obviously still would need to be fixed. Moving on to Barcelona's use of the long ball. Now, season by season, Xavi's side has gradually increased its use of switches of play. Now, whereas Real Madrid have dramatically lost their width with the change of system this season, Xavi's side are stretching the play more than ever, with the growing influence of Balde down the left and now Yamal holding fort down the right. Barcelona tend to flood the middle and then work opportunities out wide, with that switch out to the left now beginning to become a trademark feature of their play.
Space. Lovely back heel there, Lewandowski, that's 2! Lewandowski.
In terms of Barcelona's attack, XG-wise the numbers vary depending on the source you use, but it's fair to say Barcelona are within the top 2 dangerous sides in La Liga. In terms of creativity, Barcelona's final third central region raises concern. João Felix, despite drifting into the 10 area or inside left, hasn't really demonstrated the pauser to split opposition defences, and the stats are testament to that, as his creativity stats are below average. It's also worth noting that obviously Pedri has been injured, he hasn't featured much, so from a central creativity point of view, Barcelona just don't have that elite go-to passer in the number 10 areas. They're missing a De Bruyne type figure. From slightly deeper central areas, i.e. the Regista area, Barcelona have the likes of De Jong, Gundogan, and obviously Pedri to come back. So they're pretty strong at progressing the game from this area of the pitch, and most teams in Europe will struggle to match Barcelona in that regard. And the progression element from midfield obviously is taking a hit right now with De Jong and Pedri out, but long term, I don't see this being an issue. Moving on to Barcelona's flank play, from the eye test, their main source of creativity is from these wide areas. Firstly, you've got Lamine Yamal, who has this game breaker element where once the ball reaches him, you feel like anything can happen, and he turns static possession into dangerous possession. Another key source of creativity is Balde. They're heavily reliant on getting the ball to him at the right moment, and then once he's in behind, feeding onto his crosses, which create havoc. These two tend to hang out wide, and Cancelo takes up an inverted position, although he can at times deviate out wide to provide a natural right foot cross when he sees Yamal cut in. Felix and Xavi can also provide inside left crossing threats with clever clips to the far post. Honing in on Barcelona's shooting threat, in terms of their target zones, a lot seems to be to the goalkeeper's right. Reason for this may be that Barcelona's right wing is usually a flank for penetration and chaos. So the likes of Rafinha, Yamal, they're cutting in onto their left foot and shooting to the far post. And when Ferran Torres plays on the right wing, he generally tends to shoot across goal. Inside the box, they have the presence of Lewandowski and Felix, who has increasingly been demonstrating a growing poacher threat, but they lack the equivalent of a Jude Bellingham. But if injuries ease off, perhaps Gundogan may start to play higher up in the midfield and give them that late timed threat from midfield. In terms of long range threat, they don't really have anyone in the mould of Valverde, and with the style of play that they have, taking speculative shots from distance is not really a Xavi-esque trait, and they took the least long shots of all clubs in La Liga per 90 the previous season. So now moving on to how often Barcelona use the art of dribbling. Now, they're one of the top 5 leading teams in Europe this season for take-ons attempted, and 57% is an above average success rate. And it's not a surprise because in Balde, they have, apart from maybe Nuno Mendes of PSG, arguably the best take-on left-back in the world in terms of progressing the game, but also from a pure 1v1 standing start ability. He's got great footwork. And in Yamal, you've got one of the finest 1v1 young talents in the game. And obviously when the likes of Pedri and De Jong are available, they have 2 of the best take-on players in the central midfield region too. They've also got Cancelo, Fermin Lopez, Xavi. These players can travel with the ball and beat men. In terms of their defenders, Koundé does like to travel with the ball often, but his success rate is below par when compared to other elite carrying centre-backs. So this is something Xavi may need to address if he wants to take this team to the next level. In terms of headed goals, I'd say Barcelona's biggest aerial threat remains Robert Lewandowski, but are his powers on the wane? And if he's not playing, who else is a serial aerial goal threat for this Barcelona side? João Felix has started to ghost into good positions on the far post, and he is picking up some goals with his head when the cross has bypassed the opposition centre-backs. But do him and Ferran Torres really have that ability to duel and muscle centre-backs inside the box to create a proper, consistent aerial goal threat? Not in my opinion. In fairness, it's never really been a route to go for Barcelona teams historically, but it's still a weapon you'd want in your disposal within the squad, so that if a particular game situation calls for it, you can throw someone on inside the box to create a different way of breaking opponents down. So now we've looked at Barcelona in possession and in attack, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Samson, who's looked at them in depth from a defensive perspective.
Here comes Sevilla again. Luque Bacchio with the 1-2.
When in a settled shape, Barcelona tend to defend in a compact 4-1-4-1, as they look to prevent as much of the playing space for the opposition. This can leave them open on the flanks, and quick switches of play can often lead to the opposition getting into dangerous areas. Often you'll find the fullbacks being isolated 1v1 and the midfield struggling to make up the yards to get back. Furthermore, from chaotic situations such as a knockdown from a long ball, Barcelona are not the most disciplined team in terms of falling back into a compact formation. The high defensive line employed by Xavi can also leave them open from runs from deep, where the margin for error to pick up the third man run is much smaller when playing this aggressively. As soon as they lose possession, Barca's press springs into action. They aim to box their opponents in with multiple players. This aggressive approach extends to goal kicks when they push right up to the opposition's penalty box. This can, however, create a substantial gap between midfield and defence, which elite sides are likely to punish. Additionally, Barca love to press aggressively on the blind side of their opponents, often using multiple players and numbers to their advantage. The ideal scenario for them is to trap the opposition between their midfielders and commit 2 to 3 players to cut off all possible passing angles. Barcelona's defensive line is a critical element of their strategy, as they play an incredibly defensive high line, the line that they used in the 21-22 season, which often saw balls being played over the top and Liverpool's defence pushing up and playing the offside trap, which Barca do similarly. Barcelona's strategy also focuses on where they want to force the opposition. They aim to direct play to the inside wherever possible. Interestingly, they often leave the wide areas open, so if a pass goes out there, they quickly flood to that side and try and force the opposition to play inside or backwards rather than allowing the easy switch. Barcelona can struggle in defensive transitions, however. Cancelo is a culprit in this, and he can be caught in no man's land on defensive transitions. The team as a whole can be quite passive and static at times, especially when they lose the ball near their own goal. And the flanks generally, and this seems to be a running theme throughout Barca's defence, are vulnerable, especially on the right side, which doesn't have much defensive quality. When talking about sort of the leaders in defence, I would say that Xavi is Barcelona's main protagonist. He always seems to be involved in key defensive actions. He tends to initiate the press, and overall he can be best described as a defensive leader at Barcelona. Overall, whilst Barcelona have some deficiencies defensively, the effectiveness of their pressing and structural approach often means they hardly have to defend in a settled shape, and many opposition transitions are usually stifled before they can pose a threat. High pressure and an aggressive defensive line are two key components of their tactical setup. It is a style reminiscent of some iconic football teams of the past and has seen Barcelona heralded as one of the more defensively astute teams in Europe. Yes, their recent form has been choppy, but this is a mere blip in a generally well-oiled defensive system.
In terms of squad depth, you've got players who are well versed in Xavi's system, such as Alonso, Garcia, Sergio Roberto. These players can fill in defensive positions. I'd say in the case of Alonso and Roberto, they're not players you'd want as long-term fill-ins. There's absolutely no depth or even a first choice player of an elite level for the CDM position. In terms of the wings, you've got the likes of Rafinha, Ferran Torres. I'd say they're decent backups and rotation options to have. Centre forward, I would say they lack any real depth. I mean, the other day they had to throw on a 17-year-old up front. Regista, I'd say the depth is good. You've got the likes of Gundogan, De Jong, Pedri. It's just a shame that De Jong and Pedri are both out at the same time. In terms of goalkeeping backup, they've got Pena, who is a pretty decent shot stopper, very good on the ball, but I'd say he looks a bit lightweight for adult men's football. Overall, I'd say depth is definitely lacking in terms of the key areas of the pitch if we're talking about the spine of the team, i.e. goalkeeper, up front, and at number 6. So there we have it. We've looked at Barcelona's style of play, their strengths, their weaknesses, but how do we go about upgrading this side to take it to the next level. What needs to be upgraded? What needs to be fixed? Well, in our opinion, centre-back remains an area which requires an elite operator, arguably a Van Dijk in his prime type of figure, to take this backline to the next level. An heir to Sergio Busquets is an absolute must, and if someone like Rodri can't be tempted to end his career in Spain, then they need to look for someone who can develop into becoming the next great six in the game. In attack, they either need a new number 9 who's going to be their next gen Samuel Eto'o, someone who can score loads but also fit into that Barca style of play seamlessly, or perhaps even move someone like Felix to false 9, but find a left wing forward who can score upwards of 30 goals a season, a left wing equivalent to a prime Mo Salah. Now, these 4 positions are key if Barcelona want to transition from becoming a La Liga competitor into a dominant Champions League winning force. In terms of where the squad sits right now, I think they can challenge for the title just because Real Madrid are in quite a transitional phase themselves at the moment, but I don't see this side having the quality to really make an impact in the Champions League. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share and subscribe, and see you guys again next time. Bye.